Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Venables, the Oklahoma Sooners, winding down fall camp. Want to circle back and talk about some of the bigger storylines that we've seen come out of Oklahoma's fall camp, specifically over the last couple of days. I think headlined by Jackson Arnold rebounding from what sounded to be a rocky scrimmage over the weekend last weekend. That being said, I think the more fascinating storylines are, there are some players that we didn't exactly have on our bingo card to kind of break out in 2024 that are starting to put a stamp on what they are going to mean to this Oklahoma program. Want to highlight some of those names as well. Before we get into it, and as always, just want to say one to the Oklahoma fans, the amount of support y'all have shown over the last couple of weeks and months in the middle of the summer as we've talked about this program. It's truly been amazing. We can't thank y'all enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, I know every single Oklahoma fan that's listening to this has certain players that have caught their ride during fall camp as well. So I would love to hear some of your feedback and kind of big takeaways from fall camp as well. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's quickly touch on Jackson Arnold rebounding, turnover-free scrimmage on Friday. I think that's the biggest storyline. I think the one thing that really concerned a lot of Oklahoma fans going back a week ago was the 3 turnovers during the fall camp scrimmage last weekend. You look at Jackson Arnold, and we kind of all came to the same consensus that, one, we're certainly not hitting the panic button because a second-year quarterback had a rough fall camp scrimmage. But I think more importantly, you look at how this Oklahoma team is constructed. Oklahoma's banged up on the offensive line. They're still trying to figure out what their starting 5 is going to look like. All of that going up against the defensive line that is going to be one of the better units that we see in the SEC. The expectation was the Oklahoma offense was going to struggle against this Oklahoma defense. We even kind of said it's very similar to what we would used to read out of Oklahoma in the early 2000s. And I think a lot of Oklahoma fans were perfectly okay with that. But the one thing that I think made some Oklahoma fans nervous, and I certainly would agree with that, is you don't want to have Jackson Arnold turning over the football. I think if there's one thing that you don't want for Jackson Arnold, you look at this Oklahoma defense. We know this defense, or we're very confident that this defense is going to be extremely good in the SEC. You can lean on this Oklahoma defense to win you a lot of football games. I think the one thing you didn't want to hear from Jackson Arnold was the turnovers, because that's a good way to help your defense lose football games, putting your defense in bad spots. So to hear Jackson Arnold go turnover free on Friday afternoon during the scrimmage, that was my biggest takeaway. I think as this offensive line continues to get a little bit more healthy, as Jackson Arnold continues to get command over this offense, I don't think there's a lot of Oklahoma fans that are that concerned about Jackson Arnold, what he's going to do in the 2024 season. Now, I think, at least in my opinion, one of the bigger storylines that have emerged over the last couple of days are some wide receivers that are stepping up. Obviously, Andrew Anthony getting back healthy. It sounds like he is maybe ahead of schedule than what a lot of people thought. And he's practicing non-contact jersey. I'll tell you what, if you can get Andrew Anthony back for week 4 against Tennessee, I think that's the aiming point for Andrew Anthony. Now, that being said, Jaden Gibson goes down with the season-ending injury. All of a sudden, we were saying, all right, we need some other Oklahoma wide receivers, can kind of step up and become guys in this room. Let's go to a familiar name first, and that is Jalil Farouk, who sounded to be Jackson Arnold's go-to guy during the scrimmage on Friday afternoon. Look, I was just as frustrated with Jalil Farouk's performance and lack of consistency, I would say, in the 2023 season. But I would also caution a lot of Oklahoma fans to not forget that Jalil Farouk during his sophomore year flashed some serious talent. There is no question that Jalil Farouk is a very talented wide receiver in the SEC heading into 2024. If we see Jalil Farouk kind of get back on track in terms of what we saw during that sophomore season, this kid's a difference maker for this Oklahoma wide receiver room. I think we know who the guys are going to be in terms of Deion Burks, who I still think is a top 10 wide receiver in the country. Nick Anderson, probably a top 20 wide receiver in the country. Those are your wide receivers 1 and 2. But we're kind of saying, hey, who are going to be the other contributors and role players within this Oklahoma offense? We know Andrew Anthony, once he gets back full health, is going to be a guy. Jalil Farouk stepping up, J.J. Hester stepping up. I think those are some big storylines for this Oklahoma offense, where you're trying to design an offense that has multiple different ways that you can attack opposing defense. Jalil Farouk, extremely good with the football in his hands. He's a big functional athlete that also can work vertically down the field and separate. Jalil Farouk provides some juice to this Oklahoma offense, and to hear him kind of putting it together and maybe finding that consistency that we just didn't have during that junior year, I think that's a really big storyline. I think one of the other big storylines, not just coming out of the fall camp scrimmage, but really just the offseason in general, the FCS transfer Bauer Sharp. Let's put it frank. I mean, the Oklahoma tight end play in 2023 was an absolute disaster. I mean, Austin Stogner was just not a dynamic difference maker within this Oklahoma offense. Bauer Sharp, there were a lot of question marks about Bauer Sharp when he committed to Oklahoma. There's a lot of reason to be excited, but there's also some question marks about a former quarterback that transitioned to tight end that's now making the jump from the FCS level to the SEC. That being said, we kind of said when he committed, if Bauer Sharp figures it out, he's going to be a difference maker at the tight end position. It sounds like he's done exactly that, going back to his spring practice performances and now what you're reading in fall camp. Bauer Sharp seems to be a guy for Oklahoma. I think that's a massive storyline, not only because you're going to get better tight end play in 2024, but I think more importantly, what's the best way to get a young quarterback comfortable in an offense? Having a really good tight end as a safety blanket. If Bauer Sharp can be that guy for Oklahoma's offense, not only is that massive because you're getting a tight end that can be kind of a matchup nightmare, but more importantly, you're giving Jackson Arnold that big body over the middle of the field that he can rely on in the 2024 season. So Bauer Sharp coming on strong, massive storyline for this Oklahoma team. Now, the offensive line, it hard to kind of get a read on this unit because they've been so banged up over the last week. To hear Jacob Sexton kind of being the guy at left tackle, and apparently Michael Tarquin's had a few good practices as well. I think for Oklahoma's offensive line, this is kind of how I say it. I'm really happy that they have 3 games against Temple, Houston, and Tulane where they'll probably be able to work out some of those kinks, right? Because I think that there's enough talent and there's enough experience for this Oklahoma offensive line to be a quality unit in 2024. But getting those 3 games before you have to play Tennessee, that's really big. So I think most of our eyeballs, I think for most Oklahoma fans, are going to be on the offensive line, what the rotation is, what the best 5 is going to be. Hey, you had all fall camp to figure it out. Now you're going to have 3 games against Temple, Houston, and Tulane to figure it out before you get into SEC play. We'll continue to talk about this storyline as it kind of plays out into the season. I think the biggest storyline, at least on the defensive side of the football, is with Kip Lewis. Kip Lewis is such a fascinating linebacker where you saw Oklahoma really start to lean on Kip Lewis towards the end of 2023. And I think why this is so important for Oklahoma is, hey, we know, we have a dog in Danny Stutzman. We want to pair him up with just a hyper-athletic linebacker. And you go back to 2023, the beginning of 2023, look, Jaren Kanak just wasn't that guy. And we had massive question marks about Jaren Kanak in the SEC just being an athletic enough linebacker where you look at all the responsibilities that you're going to have in the SEC. These wide receivers over the middle of the field are going to be very athletic. The tight ends are going to be very athletic. And you're going to have a lot of quarterbacks that are extremely dynamic. We need our linebackers to be really good in space. Jaren Kanak just wasn't that kind of guy. I think Jaren Kanak would be an elite linebacker probably 20 years ago when you're just playing inside the tackle box. But you look at where the modern era of college football is going, and we need our linebackers to operate in space. And you looked at Kip Lewis last year and said, all right, he's undersized, but this kid plays with his hair on fire and covers so much ground. We always said if Kip Lewis can put it together between the ears and add a little bit more weight, he's going to be a special linebacker. And it sounds like he's done exactly that during fall camp. So it sounds like Kip Lewis is going to emerge as that linebacker 2 next to Danny Stutzman. I think that has the potential to be one of the biggest upgrades we see on this Oklahoma roster heading into 2024. And we always said, Kobe McKenzie, Lewis Carter, there are some, really talented linebackers in this room. The conversation was who is going to emerge out of that unit. It sounds like Kip Lewis is doing that. And I think secondly, pairing a guy like Kip Lewis behind a defensive line of this caliber, that's really fun because you look at Kip Lewis, if you can keep him clean, which I think Oklahoma is going to be able to do with how dominant they are in the defensive line, you let Kip Lewis play in space, get downhill, that's when he's going to be at his best. And so putting Kip Lewis behind a defensive line that we think is going to be that good, I think that's a really big storyline. I think the final one, and It's a good problem to have, but I think I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's a conversation point heading into 2024. How do you get all these safeties on the football field? I'm really confident that Zach Alley can do it. I think he had some of the best safety play at Jacksonville State last year, but you have Billy Bowman Jr., who I just don't think is going to leave the field. He's one of the best safeties in the country. You have Robert Spears-Jennings, who's played phenomenal during fall camp, and Peyton Bowen, who you could say the exact same thing for. You got 3 elite safeties, potentially the best safety room in the country heading into 2024. Now the conversation is, how can we maximize all of those players in the 2024 year? How can we get them all on the field and have them impact the football game? A couple of different things that come to my mind. One, I think Robert Spears-Jennings could play that cheetah role. You know, I'm not like banging the table for Kendall Dolby to be off the field, because I thought he played some really quality football for Oklahoma in 2023. But you look at Robert Spears-Jennings, he's 6'1", 220 pounds. He only missed 8% of his tackles in 2023. He can give you that run support, but he's also big and athletic enough to deal with some of those bigger jumbo wide receivers in coverage. I think Robert Spears-Jennings makes a lot of sense at the cheetah position, and then you can allow Peyton Bowen to play more in that safety role next to Billy Bowman Jr., where that's where I think he is at its best. Look, it's a good problem to have, but we say this all the time. Good coaches know how to get their football players on the field. That's going to be the biggest question mark for Brent Venables and Zach Alley, because it sounds like you got 3 absolute dudes, and Billy Bowman Jr., Peyton Bowen, and Robert Spears-Jennings. Can you get all those 3 on the football field at the same time impacting this Oklahoma defense? That is, at least in my mind, the biggest storyline in the back end. Overall, I mean, if this, we've said it all offseason, if they can figure out this offensive line, I think this defense is going to be really good, and I think they got the weapons on offense to have a really good offense. I think it's going to come down to the offensive line. We'll soon. The bullets are about to get real, so we're going to find out about this offensive line over the next couple of weeks. You know, wanted to hop on, give you guys some of my biggest takeaways from fall camp over the last couple of days. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.